Well, with South Africa's historical peace mission on the African continent, the weekend proved that we might not really have the necessary experience for the global stage. One political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze, says we might have failed to do some of the basic preparations. Let's speak now to Zinigo Mhlaba. He is live with us at UNISA, the University of South Africa. Zinigo, I know you're about to have a conversation with Professor Kotze. Let's perhaps try and understand what he means when he says we perhaps did not do basic preparations. Is he referring to that ill-fated trip to Russia and Ukraine? I'm talking about the second plane, which was carrying the security personnel alongside the journalists. If so, who's to take accountability for that?
That's correct, Claudia. That's exactly the center of the conversation we are about to have in terms of our experience, but also what issue is he taking up with, actually, and to some extent, as you're asking that question, who must then take responsibility for that? So, as you said, Claudia, that we're here at the University of South Africa. I'm going to be speaking to Professor Dirk Kotze, who's going to be explaining and elaborating. Prof, I mean, historically, we've done very well in South Africa to some extent in terms of making sure that we influence the conflicts to find about peace on the African continent, Libya, Sudan, and just our neighbors, Mozambique. But it seems as if, from your words, we were not experienced enough for the global stage. What do you mean by that?
Well, as you say, our experience is very much focused on African countries, and for that the protocols are actually different from if you go beyond that. We had one experience right in the beginning of President Mandela, who together with the Saudi ambassador in the US mediated the situation between the UK and Libya and the Lockerbie incident. But over and above that, most of the experience of South African leaders have been within the African continent. There, South Africa is obviously one of the leading powers, one of the main powers, and therefore we can to a large extent dictate how this is happening. Once you are going outside the continent, then it is obviously completely different, because then our position is not that of one of the leading powers, but rather one of the middle powers in the world. And what we've seen now, lately last week, is exactly that. Is that you go to a country like, went to a country like Poland, with, I think it's the second biggest defense force in the European Union. So they don't need to be assisted by any forces from outside. They are actually seen as a way of questioning whether they can provide the security or not. And I think that is where the problem started.
Let me come in here, Prof. Are you referring to the number of security or protection units which were on that chartered flight? Are you referring to that? Are you saying they might have felt a bit undermined for us to be bringing in such security? Was that maybe a reflection of us undermining their own security abilities to protect our president and our own head of state?
Well, those countries, Poland, Ukraine, Russia, were our hosts. So they were, in the first instance, responsible for the security of President Ramaphosa and the other African leaders. To bring in your own security means you don't trust their security. And I think that is where the breakdown, the trust relationship broke down. It was obviously the arrangements appeared to be also not being done. It was done by the police instead of by the defense force. The defense force has much more experience of this. When they take cargo from here, from Waterkloof Air Force Base, for example, to any of the other African countries, the DRC or Mozambique or Sudan or wherever, they know the protocols of how to do it, not the police. They are not involved in this. And I think this is because the police took the primary initiative in this respect. I think that is where the relationships broke down.
But how important is that communication between the police and the military? Because at the end of the day, primarily, the protection of the president is a responsibility of police to some extent. But in terms of having that experience then of transporting such weapons, then we'll need that experience of military. How important is that relationship?
It's absolutely important. And they were supposed to be able to liaise very closely with each other. What we have heard now is that the South African Air Force, part of the Defence Force, warned the police in advance that they did not have all the documentation and other requirements in place for this. So it should not have been actually a surprise. And that's why I mentioned the experience of the Air Force, that they've been involved much more in these type of missions within Africa even, but still taking into account the host country's protocols that they have to respect.
So going forward, Prof, should we still pursue that responsibility, or at least take some responsibility to making sure that those two countries find peace, but also domestically, politically, do we have that capacity? Do we have that experience? As you said, we don't have that experience, but how do we then engage? How do we, increase that capacity for us to be able to fix these problems you just mentioned?
When it comes to mediation, or when it comes to who can facilitate a peace process, there are no golden rules about it, because it depends on what is the relationship of the country that can serve as a mediator. For example, we have already seen that Turkey played a very important role in the mediation between Russia and Ukraine when they reached an agreement about the exports of wheat and of fertilizers. So Turkey is in a very unique position, and they will be able to do this type of mediation. A country from the European Union, any of them, won't be able to do it because they are seen as partisan. A country close to the US, for example, also won't be able to do it, even if they are one of the big powers in the world. So it is about what is the position. That is why very often the United Nations is being used as a mediator, because it's not seen as a country with specific interests and that they want to use and to promote those interests by becoming involved in mediation. But what was important from our point of view, and I guess there will later on the credit for that will emerge, is that South Africa opened up the idea that there must be dialogue. It's not about doing it itself, but the idea. What we are seeing now is that Ukraine is now planning an international peace conference that will be hosted, or they want it to be hosted by Switzerland, which is a neutral country in Europe. China is talking about being a possible mediator in the process. Some other countries also. So now the notion of dialogue, of negotiations, of mediation is becoming much more prominent. In the past it was how to support the two blocs, either Russia or Ukraine, in the war effort. Now it is more about how to end this, and I think this is where South Africa and other African countries did make a contribution.
Thank you very much, Prof. Prof. Dirk Kotze, giving us a sense there of how the South African position, or South Africa's influence on that mission, unfolded, and how important it is, mentioning a very important factor that at least at the end of the day, there's a global conversation now. More countries are raising up their hand. They're saying, guys, we can handle this. We can get these two countries talking. So that's it from us here at UNIS at this point. Ngambe will giving you more news when it returns after the break.